Got a lot of news to talk about today. Let's start with this. Chinese memory vendors are claiming to be doomed, tossing aside stockpile DDR modules as dropping prices cause panic. All my sources will be linked in the video description. This one's from WCCF Tech. Where are they getting this information? Well, apparently we are seeing that memory prices have dropped in China specifically, and there's been a lot of speculators. So speculators are people who were buying up all the supply, hoping to see it to continue to rise so they can buy lower, sell higher, and this in and of itself also accelerates the price increases beyond just the normal consumer demand. And it's those people who are starting to panic a bit, getting some translation posts saying things like, brothers, memory prices have taken a massive dive. We're stuck with it. We're stuck with it. We're doomed. We're screwed. Is there still any chance for the price to go back up? Meanwhile, normal consumers are like, yeah, awesome. Except that, wait, let's hold on, because posts like this are exciting, but if you actually just try to buy memory right now in the United States, this is me just going to look for a 2x16 kit of DDR5 memory on PC Part Picker at no particular speed, sorting prices low to high. The lowest priced 32 gigabyte RAM set I can get here is $360, and they go up rapidly from there. Let's say I just wanted to buy 16 gigabytes of memory. Well, that isn't great, but let's go 2x8. What's price looking like there? Still $220 just for 16 gigabytes of memory, which is in some games already not enough, especially if you have a GPU that might spill over VRAM, which is not great. What if we wanted to look at DDR4? Maybe you want to buy an older platform, get some DDR4. Well, 16 gigabytes of DDR4, if you're trying to do a budget build, looks like you can get that at around $120, so you can save some money going with DDR4 at least. DDR4, if we want to get 32 gigabytes and 2x16, because you would want 2 sticks ideally, that's up at about $200. So DDR4 is currently less expensive than DDR5 by a pretty wide margin, so people going for a more affordable build might still want to consider those, Intel 12th gen or AMD 5000 series CPUs, that kind of thing. And just overall, prices still look pretty terrible for RAM, they look terrible for storage, and GPUs have been hit as well. But there is a silver lining. People often ask me what is worth upgrading on their PC since RAM and GPU prices are so expensive right now, and there's an easy answer. Upgrading your monitor can make literally everything you do or see on your PC better, and the monitor space has been incredibly exciting lately, with high-end specs and features that used to cost thousands just a few years ago, available at extremely affordable pricing. KTC is leading that charge with their mission of offering monitors with better specs than competitors at the same price or same specs at a better price. Either way, the consumer wins, and a huge thanks to KTC for sponsoring this part of today's video. For example, check out the KTC M27T6S. Its 1440p resolution is the perfectly balanced sweet spot between fast performance and high resolution, and its 200 Hz fast IPS panel is HDR1000 certified with 1152 local dimming zones to allow the dark areas of the screen to go truly dark, while the bright highlights can reach eye-popping levels. The brightness on this display beats my extremely expensive OLED displays, and unlike my OLEDs, I don't need to babysit this display for burn-in. It's perfect no matter what style of game you play, with FreeSync and G-Sync compatibility smoothing out frame times in the biggest AAA graphical showcases, and the 27-inch size offering incredible immersion, while its 1 millisecond response time and high refresh rate will never be the reason you miss the shot in the sweatiest of multiplayer matches. The M27T6S is also fantastic for productivity use, with 100% sRGB coverage and factory-calibrated Delta E less than 2 for true-to-life color accuracy. There's nice-to-have features like an adjustable stand that allows a huge range of motion, including portrait mode, a headphone jack, USB port for firmware updates, and flexible connectivity options. Seriously, the value on offer here is almost hard to believe, but there really is no catch. KTC KTC has actually been the manufacturer behind some of the top displays from the biggest brands for many years. But starting in 2021, they've been offering their own gaming monitors to consumers directly under their own KTC branding to enable trend-setting leap-forward technologies in never-before-seen price segments. I've been using KTC displays in my home and classroom daily for over a year now, and I love them. Check the link in the video description and/or pinned comment to get the perfect KTC display for your needs now. Now, how PC makers are supplying during the supply shortage is basically, if you only have so much supply, direct it to the higher priced segments. It's also just harder to create lower priced products. We're seeing some, this again I got from WCCF Tech, but they're quoting Omdia research here, which is trying to make a projection for what to expect in 2026 versus 2025. Sorry if I just flashbanged you with the white background here. But the overall projection is for under $500 PCs to drop in sales significantly, not because people don't want budget systems, but because there's just not going to be very many of them supplied because it's just hard to do. It's hard to build anything reasonable at those price points. And same thing for the $500 to $700 range, expecting pretty massive year-on-year drops in that segment. Whereas the $700 to $900 and really $700 plus, they're generally expecting increases, although over $1,500 might see a decrease as well. So I think a lot of this people who would have bought the lower end are getting pushed into higher stuff, and some people just won't buy in general. Now, this is just an estimate, but it does make sense given the current market. Because even if there's a momentary dip in China, like, we're not expecting overall price problems to be solved. Now, another place we're seeing this is on PlayStation pricing. This is absolutely insane. So this chart, I'll admit I saw this on Reddit, but it does look accurate. This is inflation-adjusted prices for PlayStations. And what's really the important thing to see here is that I don't really care about what the price is adjusted for inflation. What I care about is the trend over time. The PlayStation 1 dropped massively over the course of several years. The PlayStation 2 dropped massively in price over the course of several years. The PlayStation 3 did have an anomalously high launch price, although to be honest, I was around at the time and got one at launch. Blu-ray discs were taking off, and it was actually by far the least expensive Blu-ray player that you could get. So if you were interested in Blu-rays, it was actually a bargain. But for a gaming console, it was quite expensive. However, it dropped in price massively over time. The PlayStation 4 also dropped in price over time, although it wasn't quite as dramatic as we'd seen in some previous generations. And we have now seen the first time in history where, adjusted for inflation, a PlayStation is now more expensive 6 years after launch than when it launched. And again, these are all theoretically adjusted for inflation. Now, I know some people are like, inflation doesn't matter given, what matters is your wage growth, etc. And honestly, none of that is the point. The point here is the trend has always been down, even adjusting for inflation. And now the trend was down, but it's just pulled back up like crazy. The PS5 Pro, insanely expensive now. Now, some people are wondering, does that mean it's now actually a better deal to buy a PC? Well, not when memory prices look like this. Anyway, so we are in a rough situation. Handheld gaming, the Legion Go 2 now costs $2,000, twice as much as the ROG Xbox Ally X, so at least that's hanging on at only $1,000. And how about the Steam Deck 2? Are we going to get a Steam Deck 2? Well, there's a rumor that it's targeting a 2028 launch. However, if RAM and NAND prices don't come down, it's possible that that could be delayed. Now, I found this at WCCF Tech. Their source is Kepler L2. And I also found, reporting on the same kind of post coming from Kepler L2 at videocards.com, a little additional information relating it to the PlayStation handheld, as well as the Steam Deck 2's relative performance and, PlayStation's relative performance, things like that. So the overall summary of this, and now Kepler L2, it's clearly not an official source. Now, has seemed to have had accurate enough leaks in the past that I would give some credence to what Kepler is saying. So anyway, there's that. Obviously, this is in the leak and rumor territory. Kepler L2 is a good but not perfect source of this kind of information and is not claiming to have a perfect idea of what's happening here, just has heard some things, right? Anyway, so the basic thought here is that the PlayStation handheld that's coming up is still a ways out, will be more powerful than a Switch 2, has heard conflicting reports on whether it will be more powerful than an Xbox Series S or not. But remember, in handheld form, you'd be targeting lower resolutions, and it would probably have access to a better upscaler because being on newer generation of AMD hardware, you'd probably have some version of PSSR, which is more like FSR 4 or 4.1. As opposed to older versions of FSR that you'd be getting on an Xbox Series S. So even if you ran at lower resolutions internally, you'd probably actually have a better image quality, even if you're at similar or even worse performance. And the Switch 2 relies on older versions of DLSS and often even relies on DLSS Lite, which looks much worse than any version of DLSS that we have on PC. Now, in the same series of conversations, he's saying that thinking that the Steam Deck 2 is still targeting a 2028 launch, but because of the RAM and NAND situation, it could get delayed, although he's saying the silver lining in a delay would be that as far as Kepler L2 knows, they're not targeting a semi-custom SoC, meaning if Valve had to delay the Steam Deck 2, then they could, and a newer generation of AMD APU came out in the meantime, they could just go with that because they haven't developed anything custom from AMD that they're kind of locked into contractually for that launch. Whereas things with upcoming consoles like the PlayStation 6, the PlayStation handheld, Xbox's Project Helix, all of those are rumored to be using a semi-custom SoC. So if you've done all of the work to do some custom design, then you're more contractually and you're kind of already in on that, right? Locked in on that. So it's harder to change your plans as far as the overall chip. Now, personally, I'm curious if they may revise plans for like how much system memory and how much SSD space the launch versions of the consoles will have. Because previous rumors was that like the next generation of consoles could have a lot of memory. And that would make sense if they're targeting like machine learning tasks, which use a lot of memory, and ray tracing and path tracing and all of that. But they may need to rein it in a bit just for cost reasons because, as stated earlier, DDR is insanely expensive, and now SSDs are too. So a lot of people are at least expecting the SSD size to be smaller than would have originally been planned for next-gen consoles. Maybe not going over 1 terabyte when maybe ideally you would have been at 2 or 3 or 4 terabytes by 2028 or whenever we get these. But like I said, this is all still kind of in the leaks and rumors territory, but that's where we're at with that. Now, all of these prices soaring is driven by AI, data center setups, but there's also controversy about generative AI use in game development. This is coming in kind of tangentially with, DLSS 5 is a type of generative AI, and how do people feel about that? But where people seem to feel a lot more strongly is in the generative AI use in the actual game development process. Now, some people are on the side of, hey, whatever gets us games faster, because it's taking way too long to develop games. Used to get major releases and major franchises once every year or two. That's how it always was for me growing up. I didn't have to wait more than maybe 2 years, 3 at the most, to get the next huge release in a massive AAA franchise. And now it's 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you might get one major franchise release in an entire console generation, and console generations are kind of getting increasingly long, and it's all crazy. So Take-Two is a huge publisher. They've got like Rockstar Games, Grand Theft Auto under them, all of that. They've apparently laid off their AI team, at least the head of their AI division, and this was for the use of AI in game development. That was their division at the company, and like researching those use cases. They seem to have laid off their head of their AI division, and this is from social media posts from that person who was the lead. So Luke Dicken joined Take-Two as its AI head in January last year. This is reported by PCGamer.com. And he's saying that less than 18 months into the role, he has revealed that he's parting ways with Take-Two, saying, "It's truly disappointed that I have to share with you that my time with T2 and that of my team has come to an end." So, and that of my team. Now, that's interesting phrasing because it could just be his time with his team, but the team is still there. So that's definitely one way you could read this, not implying that the entire team is gone. But in general, this does at least bring up questions on, is Take-Two, maybe backing off some of their AI push? Now, a lot of publishers have been talking about wanting to use generative AI to speed up the development process, but not wanting assets that were like art assets that were developed by generative AI to be in the final release of the game. Although there have been some more controversial takes where it's just like, peel off the Band-Aid, guys, we're doing this, just use it, admit it, do it, So this is going to be a huge thing that just to keep an eye on in the gaming space and all of that. Now, speaking of Take-Two and expensive games they're developing, apparently GTA 6 has probably been spending over $3 billion just on staff costs developing since 2019. That's just Rockstar North. That's how expensive GTA 6 development is. Now, most games aren't at the $3 billion price point. And obviously, GTA 6 can count on much higher than typical sales for the average AAA release. But a lot of games are very expensive to develop now. We're seeing news from Eidos Montreal that they have reportedly canceled a game codenamed Wildlands that they have already spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing. And apparently, it was fairly far along, with it being described as being like already into the debugging phase, with most development actually complete. Now, the game, I was hoping that they didn't cancel another Deus Ex, because they've already canceled, I think, the third game in the, what was his name? Jensen? I'm already forgetting now. I played the first two with him. Anyway, so I was worried it was that, but apparently it's Wildlands. Now, what is Wildlands? It was described as an open-world action-adventure game played in third person, in which players took control of a character named River. Get it? Wildlands River? Haha. Anyway, River belonged to a group of teenagers called the Spirit Bounds, who could fend off evil spirits with their magical staffs and ride mythical creatures. The protagonist's companion was a giant moose-like animal called Redheart, which River could ride to navigate the map. I don't know about you guys, but I almost fell asleep reading that. So maybe it's not too big of a loss that this game is apparently getting canceled. Although it would be nice if they'd already done all of that work to maybe get it published, but maybe they just smelled it as a flop on their hands or something and just cut their losses. I don't know. But apparently that is what's happening. This sounds like you asked ChatGPT for generic YA fantasy story. Anyway, but whatever. Now, another interesting article, I've seen in a number of places reporting on this, is so back at GDC, what was that, 2 weeks ago now? DLSS 5 got the major headlines, but NVIDIA was also showing off RTX Mega Geometry Foliage. Now, it's a demo that was described as being Witcher 4 related, but it's very, very clear that this is not representative of, why not, this stupid thing on the way, can I zoom out or something? There we go. This is not representative to the Witcher 4 gameplay. So that being said, I believe they did say that the tree assets were from Witcher 4 team. Now, these trees do look pretty crazy, but the RTX Mega Geometry, what this is about is it actually sounds really interesting, and I was less supportive of this when thinking of it as an NVIDIA vendor lock technology. However, the actual full hour-long talk that this came from at GDC is now available, and there's actually some really interesting information in that. One of it was mentioning that similar to how shader execution reordering and opacity micromaps were originally only NVIDIA supported those, but they've now been worked into DirectX, and so it would be vendor agnostic. Anybody with hardware that can do it can run those technologies. That seems to be the way that they're trying to go with the RTX mega geometry idea, if I understood the talk correctly. It sounded like they're working with Microsoft to get this into DirectX. And why that's such a big deal is one issue with ray tracing and path tracing in games is you're tracing against not the actual geometry in the game, but you're tracing against a BVH structure, a bounding volume hierarchy, which uses a simplified version of the game's geometry. However, what's going on with this is the idea is to have it work more like have the actual BVH function more like Nanite does in Unreal Engine 5, where it's basically like constantly redoing all the LODs to be just how much you need for like how many pixels it's actually using on the screen and working really dynamically. So the idea here would be that your BVH structure could actually be a lot more representative of all the detail in your actual geometry. But obviously that sounds really costly to do, but the idea behind RTX mega geometry is to actually make that a much more efficient process. Again, watching the full talk, there were some interesting things. They were even talking about getting to a point where if your BVH isn't really simplified, it's actually just basically everything, that's where you can start to actually think about just path tracing games and no longer needing anything in rasterization and not actually being much slower than just rasterizing the game. So that's still off in the future, but that was part of their talk here, is if you can, again, I'm not a game developer, but my best understanding of that situation was, again, that they're trying to not have this just be vendor locked, they're trying to get it into DirectX, and that if you can get that BVH efficient enough and detailed enough, and with the improved path tracing performance on newer generations of hardware, you could reach a point where rasterization is actually not more efficient at rendering, and it could be more efficient to just skip all of that and just do a path tracer. Also part of this talk, so the second half, the first half hour was about this RTX mega geometry. The second half hour was about like, how do you actually build a path tracer as a game developer, which I found interesting despite not being a game developer. Now, another part of this talk though was, so how performant is this? Now, it's important to note that this is just foliage, not a full game, but it's detailed foliage, and foliage tends to be one of the really demanding things to render in a game. But they did discuss how quickly this was rendering. And again, just a demo, it's not actually Witcher 4, but the RTX 5090, running it at 1440p, but then applying upscaling to 4K output, so DLSS quality on a 4K output. So 4K monitor, DLSS quality, 1440p internal rendering resolution, but then sometime is used to upscale to the 4K output. So a native 1440p would be faster. It was running at 80 FPS. But if you're running on a 1440p monitor with DLSS quality, which would be a 960p internal rendering resolution, that was running at 58 FPS. And they are mentioning that it did work on a 12 gigabyte GPU. They're saying that for memory, the total app was using about 5 gigabytes, but that, Windows would report more because then your graphics driver, et cetera, are using some more stuff. Anyway. But this is actually sounding like they're really trying to get this to be fairly performant. And it's just interesting to look ahead because, again, the next generation of consoles has talked a lot about path tracing performance, and that's even on AMD-based hardware, right? So we know that in a future console generation, once what I'm guessing will be extremely long cross-gen period is over, it's possible that some games that only target the PlayStation 6 and not any version of the PlayStation 5 could start looking at why rasterize at all. Now that's still many years down the road, but it does look like there's things happening in both the game engine software side of things as well as in the hardware developments from AMD and NVIDIA to start to push towards that kind of a future. but we still have to see where it goes and how long it takes to get there. I think the main thing that's going to hold that back is, like I said, that it's going to be a really extended cross-gen period. With game development so ridiculously expensive, obviously not $3 billion for most games, but hundreds of millions of dollars, definitely a thing. In that world, that's where game developers can't rely on just launching on the PlayStation 6 until there's a lot of PlayStation 6s out there and not too many people still on the PS5. So I think it's going to be a long time before we actually see engines just completely path trace everything and forget about anything being done in rasterization. But you can see the groundwork being laid for that. But I would guess we're talking minimum 7-8 years before we'd see that. I'm just guessing. Maybe not before any game would try it, but before it's a big deal. Now, while this isn't actually Witcher 4, this is interesting. Now, this is a bit older news. This came out on March 20th, but I thought I'd reference it since we were talking about Witcher. So Witcher 4, not really seeing that right now, just a demo. But apparently, there's been this rumored Witcher 3 DLC that might actually be coming out this year, kind of to get people interested again and lead into Witcher 4. Now, that's been rumors, and it still is rumors, but CD Projekt Red has confirmed some unannounced gaming project that will ship this year. Now, we know Witcher 4 is not ready to ship in 2026. So, Witcher 3 DLC? Maybe. Because we also don't think we're getting any more Cyberpunk DLC. So anyway, could be happening. Now, another interesting thing that got added by NVIDIA, and this was a little bit overshadowed by the DLSS 4.5 multi-frame generation, but in that same app update, although you have to be in the beta version to get it, I believe, at this point, NVIDIA added auto shader compilation. Now, when I first heard that, I thought it was something more exciting than what it actually is, if I'm being honest. I thought this was going to be something like, Microsoft has talked about advanced shader delivery, where shaders are compiled in the cloud and then downloaded to your system so you can skip shader pre-compilation entirely. And Intel has actually added their own version of that to their graphics driver. I haven't actually tried that out, so I don't know all the details on that and how well it's working. So I thought that this might be NVIDIA doing that, but it isn't. It still sounds somewhat useful, though. So basically, this is just for when you download a new graphics driver, oftentimes you then have to recompile your shaders in games. So remember, like when you first launch a game, most games will have a shader pre-compilation step. And sometimes that can take several minutes, sometimes longer if you have a slower CPU. I've seen some games take 15 or 20 minutes, although that's pretty rare. Anyway, it's kind of annoying. So what this is basically just allowing you to trigger the shader compilation in the NVIDIA app before you actually launch the game. So you could do that ahead of time, or like right after you've got a driver update. So you update your drivers, you could actually tell your games to start compiling the shaders again, because you're going to have to do it anyway when you launch the game. So that's how I'm understanding this update. So it sounds neat, a good thing to have, but just less exciting than what I initially thought it might be, which would have been the cloud computed shaders that you just download to your system. Because wouldn't it be nice if you just you install your new driver and it just automatically gives you the option to just download pre-compiled shader cache for all of your games or whatever games you want. Maybe you could select them off a list. That's where it would be nice if we get to that point, but this does not seem to be that. Now, last thing I'll mention is Steam on Linux reaches 5.33% in March Steam hardware survey, highest on record. So Steam gaining market share. Sorry, not Steam, like Steam OS. So Steam, not just Steam OS, but that's a big part of the Linux. But anyway, there's other Linux builds out there, good for gaming. But it's been interesting seeing how frustrated people are with Windows and seeing, this is still a pretty small percent, but it's growing. But sounds like Microsoft's next console with their Project Helix Xbox might be more of a Windows PC console, so you get more of the console version of Windows up against the more like console version of Linux with your Steam machine and Steam OS and Steam Deck and all that. So interesting stuff. Hopefully you guys found today's video useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day. Don't forget to check out the link to the monitor deal in the video description, because again, a lot of prices suck right now. Monitors, not so much. Silver lining, at least a nice thing happening there. Anyway, hope you all have an excellent day.